Welcome back to With the First Pick. In this edition, Perfect Fix. Going to fix the old Miami Dolphins here. Breaking down how it all happened, how they got here, who stays, who goes, and if this group, which somehow won 20 games and went to the playoffs in the first 2 years of Mike McDaniels, can they find that form again? If we're talking about a complete overhaul after back-to-back losing seasons. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Carthon. Before we get going here, if you're a Dolphins fan and you're watching or listening, go to the old comment section on YouTube there and let us know where you would start. Chris Greer, of course, was fired mid-season. It sounds like Mike McDaniel, according to reports, is going to be back, and our inveterate With the First Pick reporter, Rand Carthon, has been reporting that for a while as well. All right, but what are we going to do with Tua? What are you going to do with Tyreek? The salary cap implications to all that. I'm curious what you guys think. So let's know in the comments. I read them all, and I even respond to a few. All right, Rand, so here we go. Let's start with here. I'll lay the groundwork, and then you can give us your expertise as a front office guy from more than 20 years experience here. How did we get here? So we're going to record this as we head into week 17. Miami just got their doors blown off. Once again, they have 6 wins. They currently have the 10th overall pick in the 2026 NFL draft. And it sort of feels like the Dolphins hit their ceiling in this McDaniel speed-based offense, which was pretty much impossible to stop the first 2 years in 22 and 23. But also it never felt like there was infrastructure in place to overcome the things we've always been talking about, the injuries, the cold weather, the annual late season collapses, and then the last 2 seasons, it felt like the rest of the league caught up to what the Dolphins were doing, especially when Tua, for example, the point guard of this offense, had a concussion or was out or wasn't on point. Everything just seemed to not work and not even close to being working. So with all that said, and with no real plan B in place, if Tua went out or Tyreek got hurt, and all these unanswered questions about toughness and December football, knowing what we know, one simple question. Assuming that Mike McDaniel comes back according to reports, number one, 2 simple questions. Are you okay with that? And number 2, what's the best method to get the GM in place so they can work together as quickly as possible and fix this mess?
All right. So number one, yeah, I'm okay with Mike McDaniels returning as the head coach. And I only say that because him getting the job was based on his ability to quote unquote fix Tua. Right, or put Tua in a situation where he could be successful, because that was what the Dolphins as an organization was trying to do at the time. We just talked about it on one of the shows, Lige Duzeboy and myself, and Lige mentioned the 30-play highlight tape that Mike McDaniels supposedly made during his process of taking the Dolphins head coaching job. Well, a lot of that was to build confidence in a player, Tua Tagovailoa, who at the time lacked confidence coming from under the Brian Flores regime. So a lot of that was to build confidence. I think giving Mike McDaniel a chance to build the team with his type of quarterback, whatever that is, if it's Tua, if it's not, give him the opportunity to pick a quarterback that he wasn't able to pick out of the gates. And so with that said, being able to pick a quarterback, you're going to need a front office executive, a GM in place. And I think it's one of those situations where this is a weird one, right? Because you're going to keep the head coach in place, but you're going to bring a GM in. And the number one thing that you always want from your GM and your head coach is to be in lockstep, to have that collaboration, which collaboration
Can I ask a question real quick to interrupt you? Yeah. Would this be a situation, if you're owner Stephen Ross, where you're asking Mike McDaniel his thoughts on the GM?
Yeah, I mean, Mike McDaniels will be involved in the GM hiring process at some point or other, because no matter what, you don't want to make this a shotgun marriage, right? Where you're just putting 2 random people together that have never worked together. You
like this podcast?
Pretty much. You see, I'm currently talking to you from Broward County Jail.
Stop it.
Because I went upside your head the other day.
The lawyer told me not to say nothing, so you just keep going about Mike McDaniel.
But I think having someone that has worked with Mike McDaniels, that understands Mike McDaniel's systems, would be beneficial here. Now, I know there's going to be some school of thought of like, okay, well, what about if it doesn't work out in year 1? And what if that GM wants to be able to hire a head coach? I don't think when you bring in a new GM, I don't think you still make a decision on Mike McDaniel after 1 year working with the new GM. It's just hard because so much of his tenure right now has been him and Chris Greer building the team, right? So now you bring in a new GM, whomever it may be, and if you're only going to give them 1 year, then at this point you might as well just blow up the whole thing and allow 2 different people to come in. So because I want to overachieve and do my homework on this show,
Let's go.
I'm gonna give you some names of some guys, some GM candidates. May not be on the quote unquote hot list that everyone talks about, and some names that everyone talks about, but these are guys that would make sense because they are guys that are qualified and have the ability to lead an organization. But these are also guys who have experiences with Mike McDaniels, who have experience with the system and understand how to successfully build football teams, doing it the way that Mike McDaniels is going to want to do it. So the first name I'm going to give you is a guy that's currently in there. That's the interim GM, Champ Kelly. He's the interim GM. He's gone 4-2 as interim GM. He's been an interim GM before with the Las Vegas Raiders, where him and Antonio Pierce together had a winning record at 5-4 as interim GM. An interim head coach. So he has the experience. He's been in the building with Mike McDaniels for a full year. They're running the building together right now. And I think the world of Champ, but I think he is a qualified guy that they will give a long extended look to in becoming the full-time GM. The next name I'm going to give you is Demetrius Washington. He's currently the assistant GM in Minnesota. He's Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's right-hand guy along with Ryan Grigson. Demetrius worked with Mike McDaniels. I keep saying McDaniel.
Singular, yeah.
In the San Francisco 49ers, where he led the research and development department. Now, what people will tend to see, and he's an analytics guy. Demetrius is more than an analytics guy. There's nobody that studies tape more than Demetrius to make sure that the tape and the numbers marry each other. And so he worked really closely with Mike McDaniel in terms of all the different projects that they did, not only from a draft and free agency standpoint, but from a week-to-week coaching standpoint in terms of play calling and all the stuff that we talk about now, down and distance, when to go for, what teams like to do. So Demetrius would be a really good candidate there.
Hey, Rand, let me ask you quickly, before you move on, talking about Demetrius and that marriage potentially with Mike, who is an Ivy League guy. When you work with Mike, does he come across as like a brainiac, or is he just like a football coach? Because sometimes he feels like he's maybe thinking too much, and other times he just seems like he's out there being your run-of-the-mill 1985 football coach.
No, if you didn't know Mike McDaniel went to Yale, he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't give you that. Mike has swag about himself. Not saying that people that come from Ivy League schools don't. Kwesi, you have swag too, former Princeton grad there. But Mike carries himself as a football coach and as just a real dude. So you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know it at all. So, I mean, yes, he's a very analytical person and has an analytical brain. And I think we all see that in just having conversations with him or seeing him speak to the general public, but you don't see that. The next guy I want to give you is RJ Gillen, who is the currently assistant GM with the San Francisco 49ers. RJ has done a great job in assisting John Lynch this year, especially with all the turnover they've had on that roster. We saw him clinch a playoff berth yesterday, and they have a chance to be a 12-win team after losing as many people as they have. RJ is a former player. He played at LSU. He also has a JD, so he has a law degree, and has experience in working in the NBA, worked under R.C. Buford with the San Antonio Spurs. So he comes from that background and understanding how to team build, and he's the day-to-day guy in there with the San Francisco 49ers. And one final guy I want to give you, it was a name that was hot a couple years ago, has kind of since cooled off due to the organization he's in. But Kyle Smith, the assistant GM in Atlanta, Kyle Smith is his father is one of the best GMs that we've seen, and AJ Smith that led those Chargers teams, built those Chargers teams. So he has that pedigree. He was running the Washington Commanders for a time there before he became the assistant GM in Atlanta. Atlanta had one of the best drafts, I think, of last year's draft class. So he understands how to get it, and he has history of working with Mike McDaniel during those days in Washington. So those are just 4 names. There are going to be a multitude of other names that are going to come out. Brandon Brown, Ian Cunningham, John Eric Sullivan, Ray Agnew. But the 4 names I gave you are 4 names that have worked with Mike and I think have an understanding of how Mike works and how he operates.
And that's important. Number one, because I don't think a lot of folks have heard those names, and I'm glad you brought them up for that reason. But also to your previous point, this ain't an arranged marriage. I mean, it could be, but if you want this thing to work, there probably has to be some basis of relationship. I'll be interested to see how Dolphins fans feel about Mike McDaniel coming back, I probably have an idea. But the first 2 years, this team scored 70 points in week 3 of the 2023 season on the Denver Broncos, a team that now currently has the best defense on planet Earth. And they got their doors blown off in the week 16 game against the Bengals, just how quickly things can change. But all right, so let's move on here. Take a little look under the hood. I'm going to set the table. I want to get your thoughts on fixing this stuff. And you got 5 minutes to do it. The Dolphins are currently 28th in available salary cap space. They're $2.8 million over heading into the offseason. That's not a deal breaker, but they got to move some chairs around there in the old financial living room to fix this thing. So first things first, what are we going to do with Tua? Because he has been benched. Quinn Ewers played in week 16 and he was okay. And if you're watching and you see this graphic of Tua's remaining contract, the salary cap implications are severe would be one word for it. So listen, if they give him a post June 1st designation and they move on from him in 2026, the cap hit in 26 is $67.4 million, and then another cap hit in 27 of $31.6 million, which is like the easiest pill to digest if you're trying to figure this thing out. So if you're moving on from Tua, Rand, what are the implications? We saw the Broncos do it with Russ Wilson and actually sort of figured it out and bounced back pretty quickly. But it sounds like you're living in a world where you think Mike McD needs to get his own quarterback, and maybe that means, ripping the Band-Aid off with this Tua situation sooner rather than later.
Just to go back and just talk about how do you fix this cap situation, where they are, and just in terms of cap space, they're a little bit under as it currently holds. And looking at these numbers that I did last week, they're going into the offseason with a current dead cap hit of $74 million and some change, right? So that, I think at the time, that's ninth most in the league. Those numbers could have changed just a little bit from last week, but that's where they are. You have 2 moves here that you can do that will get you right back where you need to be in this cap situation, and that's Tua and that's Tyreek Hill. Those are the 2 that you restructure those, whether it's moving on. And I think Tua's dead cap hit is extremely high, and Tyreek Hill's is a little bit more manageable. Even though it's a high number, it's still a little bit more manageable because Tyreek's carrying a cap number next year of $51.9 million. So one way or another, you're either going to restructure and have him back, or you're going to move from under this deal, and that'll put you right back into place to where you need to be, and you're above the cap numbers. Now, to answer your question on Tua Tagovailoa, I think the writing's on the wall. You have to move on.
Yeah.
I think you have to move on, and I think that'll be the number one question that these GM candidates will face is where do you stand with Tua Tagovailoa? And I think with this Mike McDaniel system, again, I keep talking about, you're going to hear me say it a lot, the Mike McDaniel system. I think you see that as long as you can play point guard, you know where to go with the football, and you're accurate, he's going to scheme these things up to get you open. Quinn Ewers started yesterday as a 7th-round draft pick. Now, I know he threw 2 interceptions, but he was efficiently moving the ball. They put him in a situation where it wasn't all on him, and he threw the 2 interceptions, but he knew where to go with the football, and the plays was there to be had. You go all the way back to us in San Francisco, and we had Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, the very well-known story about what we were able to do with him. But again, another 7th-round draft pick. So it doesn't have to come with a 1st-round draft pick, a top 10, a top 5 talent. You go all the way back to their days in Washington, a 4th-round pick in Kirk Cousins, which is the quarterback that they truly coveted, and not necessarily Robert Griffin III. And look at the careers that they've made with some of the other quarterbacks. These guys know that you don't have to have the guy with the elite traits to play the quarterback, because for them, it all comes between the ears and your ability to process.
Yeah, and I think with Tua, you're walking such a fine line, because when he is on, he's one of the best anticipation throwers in the league. But we've seen the accumulation of the concussions, the cold weather, his lack of arm strength, all tend to make your life a lot more difficult, if you're trying to scheme things up. And especially with the way he played in that Steelers game, it's hard to argue that he deserved much more of a shot, because it looked like a freshman quarterback making his first start in high school. It's just some crazy stuff going on there. So, all right, they got to figure that out. That's going to be a painful ripping off of the Band-Aid there. In terms of free agency, I'll give you some of the guys on their roster who are potential noteworthy guys that they may consider bringing back, and then I'll give you some other team free agents that might make sense because this defense has struggled as well. So on the roster, guys whose contracts will be up: Larry Borum, offensive line; Darren Waller, who's been playing extremely well coming out of retirement; Rasul Douglas in the secondary; more offensive linemen: Brunskill, Cole Strange, Julian Hill, the tight end out of Campbell, birthplace of Ryan Wilson. Shout out Bowie's Creek. And then Jack Jones, the defensive back. Those guys are all going to be free agents on the roster. As for free agents, they could sniff around on. This guy's going to be at everyone's list till he gets signed. Trey Hendrickson, edge rusher. David Njoku, if they don't want to bring back Darren Waller, if he decides to retire. Jamel Dean outside. I think Rashid Shaheed would be a nice sort of partial replacement for Tyreek. We saw some of the things he's done in Seattle since that trade. And if you're shooting for the moon, Rand, and trying to bolster the defensive line, Devontae Wyatt's only 27. His contract's up. I'd imagine the Packers are going to want him back, and DJ Wanham is 28. So give me a couple names of guys you may like, you don't like, that might help fix this team in terms of relatively cheap, or maybe you got to pay for some of these guys and getting back on track.
Yeah, I mean, I like the David Njoku name that you threw out because the tight end is key in this system, and having a player that you can get the ball to in space, that can run after the catch, and a guy that can also block. David Njoku is a solid blocker in the run game, so I like that pick. The big thing for these guys is if you are the Miami Dolphins, a lot of what they've done to build this team during the Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer era was going out, making trades and getting these big name guys and paying them. And I think this time around, you're going to see them probably lean more towards building through the draft and then getting some back-end free agents. You mentioned Dan Brunskill. Dan Brunskill was a guy that when we were all in San Francisco, myself and even R.J. Gillen that we talked about, this was a guy that we found in the UFL league that we gave a tryout to. He made our football team and ended up being a starter for us and had played all 5 positions. And then I signed him in Tennessee, and he played for us there. And then McDaniel signed him this year, brought him to the Dolphins. They're going to go out with, in terms of free agency, they'll make 1 or 2 big name guys or nice moves, but the majority of the guys that you're going to see are going to be the guys that have played for him, that they understand what's expected, what the expectation is. And again, there's nothing better to have in that locker room than a bunch of guys that can speak the message, that can be purveyors of the message and be an extension of the coaches in the locker room.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense here. All right. Let's talk about some draft picks here. By the way, Miami, season high 45 points allowed in that week 16 loss to the Bengals. 5th time allowing 30+ points this season. That ain't great. So maybe that lends our attention on the defensive side of the ball. As I mentioned, they currently have the 10th pick heading into week 17 here. They're 6-9, and they have needs just about everywhere. They drafted Kenneth Grant in the 1st round out of Michigan, defensive lineman. He has 2 sacks this year. I think it's fair to say he's been up and down. Draft class hasn't quite hit, in part because of injuries, in part because sometimes it takes rookies a while to develop. So I'll just list the needs, and they're pretty much, they throw a dart at the position board: edge rusher, defensive line, wide receiver, tight end, linebacker, corner, safety, offensive line, and last but not least,
the whole football team. Just say whole football team.
Whole football team, quarterback. So let's start there, Rand. If you're picking 10 when this thing's said and done, and one of the 3 names, Fernando Mendoza, Dante Moore, Ty Simpson, should they all come out? One of those guys is sitting there at 10. Is that the layup pick, or bigger needs if there's an edge rusher there, or defensive lineman, or maybe a Caleb Downs falls to 10, for example?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a layup pick there. Ty Simpson, I think, would fit a Mike McDaniel system in terms of the quarterback position, but we've seen the way he's played down the stretch, and he's played well in spots. But and you did a hell of a job in the article that you wrote on his ability to throw the ball downfield. And we know how big that's been in Mike McDaniel's system, to be able to push the ball down the field, which is an area where Ty Simpson struggles. I think you sit at 10. I don't think you move up because, like you said, they have 8 draft picks. They have a 1, a 2, 3 threes, a 4, a 5, and a 7. I don't think you leverage the future to go up from 10 to get one of these guys. Right. I think you sit there. I think you take the best available player because, like you listed off a ton of needs. So there's going to be a best available player at one of those needs there for you at 10.
Yep. No, I think that's right. You're not in a position to trade up given all the other things you got to sort out before we get to the draft. All right, producer Striker, let's talk about playoffs. What we got?
Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs?
I think
Get me.
I think we're pretty used to of Coach talking about the Dolphins. But look, they won 11 games in 2023, and I mentioned that 70 burger they dropped on the Broncos back in the day. All that said, this feels like a different football team. So, optimistically, Rand, give the fans some hope. Can this be a one-year turnaround? By the way, you know the last year the Dolphins won a playoff game?
2000.
You know. All right. Fair enough. Good job. You did your homework. So they've been to the playoffs 5 times, I think, in this century. Some hope. Can we get back to the playoffs in 2026? Let's start there. I won't say they won a playoff game, but can we get back to some January football, keeping the head coach and making a bunch of other changes?
I mean,
that's a no.
I'm a little stuck right now. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the AFC is so loaded.
Yep.
It's so loaded. It's so wide open that I don't know that it's that easy. But we've seen teams have one-year turnarounds. We look at what the New England Patriots are doing. And so I just think that the AFC East in and of itself is loaded. I think the NFC South is making noise, obviously, with the Jacksonville Jaguars, the way they're playing. The Colts, if Daniel Jones is back healthy, the Houston Texans. And so I just think right now they could be a 8, 9, 10-win team next year, but it probably won't be enough for them to make the playoffs.
I think that's fair. And the big issue, if you're bringing Mike McDaniel back, is that the ownership has to understand that. But as you like to say, the owner's never fired himself, so maybe he doesn't have to understand that. But that's the reality of the situation. All right, if you are a Dolphins fan and still with us here, let us know in the comments. Give us some names of some free agents that you want. Maybe some on the team currently that you want to keep. If there are none, let us know that. Some free agents on the outside that perhaps you might be interested in. David Njoku is a name that I mentioned that Rand was on board with. And then who is your top draft pick at the 10th pick if they're picking 10 by the time this thing's all said and done? Going quarterback, going another position, going Caleb Downs if he's there, edge rusher. Let us all know that. In the meantime, thanks as always for joining us. Hit that subscribe button and just be a little reminder here. We'll be fixing every single team that missed the playoffs, so we'll catch you guys in the next one.